during the course of looking into some of the things that Inge had shared with me about her story and that she had shared with my friend when he recorded her story, I just started Googling, did this really happen? Show me a picture of this. I want to understand this better. I didn't even know where East Prussia was. So I was starting from scratch. And it was during that research that I came across the term German wolf children. And I nearly fell off my chair. I read the description of these children, and I said, oh my goodness, that's Inge. That's her story. So I reached out to her, I called her, and I said, are you sitting down? Have you ever heard this term before? And of course she hadn't, because it was her life. She was a solitary kid doing this solitary thing. It wasn't like there was a group of these people that got together, and she ended up here in the US. She didn't stay in Lithuania. So anyway, that's where the term German wolf child, that's why the film is titled Wolf Child, because she is a German wolf child. So now that we've got the camera set up, I can start talking about what constitutes a German wolf child. So we've already talked about that part of the world, East Prussia, Königsberg in East Prussia, geographically separate part of Germany. And when the Russians came in and took over, any German that was still living, and there were not that many, any German that was still living was basically allowed to starve to death, to die of disease, to die of malnutrition, to die of suicide. Adults were put to work. Anybody that was physically capable was put to work. Inge's mother was gone every day. I can't look at you. Inge's mother was gone every day, all day. She would give her kids this hard little crust of loaf of bread in the morning, and that would be their food for the day. So she and her brother would dig through trash cans, beg for food. They'd walk around begging for food. They'd steal things. And you'll see and hear some of that from Inge in the film, just to stay alive. And before long, it was very clear that unless something radically different happened, they were all going to die. So Inge was 9 years old. She took it upon herself to sneak onto a train. She didn't know where the train was going, but she knew that there was a land of bread out there because the other kids who were in the same position as her, digging through trash, eating fish bones and potato peels and things like that, that they talked about this land of bread. So she snuck onto a train. She ended up in Kaunas, Lithuania, and from there she had some adventures, which are in the book that I wrote about her story. Came back, couldn't find her family, and so she snuck back onto another train, ended up in Kaunas again. And as a 10-year-old, she just started wandering around, doing what she had been doing in Königsberg for those many years under Russian occupation. Eventually, she was introduced to a mother and some young girls. She ended up in the countryside with them. That didn't last long, maybe a couple of months. And then she was once again left on her own to wander through the Lithuanian countryside from place to place, looking for food and shelter just to stay alive. And just to give you a sense of what the Lithuanian countryside was like at that point, it was like Little House on the Prairie. There was no running water, there was no electricity. It was very, very rural. So even though in other parts, certainly in the United States and other parts of the world were developed at that point, they were not in the Lithuanian countryside. And she was used as labor, feeding the livestock, making bread, doing all kinds of different things, watching the livestock. And that's how she lived her life for 15 years until something radical happened and altered the course of her life, and that's why she's sitting here with us today. So now that I've given you a little bit of background, I'd like to read just a little bit from the first chapter of the book that I wrote. I'm working with a literary agent to get this book published, and would love to see it eventually turned into a mini-series on a streaming service or like Netflix or Amazon or something like that. So I can't give you a timeline for that. That's all dependent on somebody finding interest in this story, but everybody who hears Inge's story is very touched by it. So let me just read a little bit and then we'll show the film and then I'll take any questions. Inge lay curled in a ball under the threadbare woolen blanket, trying hard not to move. The wooden floorboards of the open train car dug into her bony side. She was situated between two Lithuanian women whose legs acted as a corral, holding her tightly in one spot. They had been selling eggs and butter on the black market in Königsberg and were heading home. It was hardly a lucrative business. The ladies were bundled up to protect themselves from the chilly temperatures, but they were poorly dressed. They wore tattered scarves and shoes made of wooden soles tied to their feet with rags. However, in spite of their misfortunate state, they didn't hesitate to help Inge. Inge had been darting under and around the train cars to avoid detection by the Russian soldiers who lurked nearby. Even though she was small for 9 years old and the train was so expansive, it had been challenging for her to find a place to hide. She happened to look up and noticed the women watching her. They were older than Mama, but had kind eyes just like hers, and sat on the floor facing the back of the train in order to protect themselves from the wind. One of them glanced around to make sure the coast was clear, while the other lifted the blanket that was spread across their laps and gestured for Inge to crawl under. She didn't need to be invited twice. In a flash, she was nestled between their warm bodies. Not wanting to attract the attention of the Russian guards who were prowling around in search of German stowaways, the Lithuanian women spoke in low, muffled voices. Anyone caught attempting to sneak onto a train would be dragged off and whipped. One of the women used the term volkatukai several times and gently patted Inge's hip as she talked. Inge could sense the pity in their voices, but wasn't able to understand what they were saying. She couldn't speak Lithuanian. Not yet, anyway. As she lay in a fetal position, Inge did her best to remain still, afraid that even the slightest movement would signal her presence. Fear gripped her as she recalled how the guards reacted to the discovery of a German stowaway. Other children were also playing this dangerous game in an attempt to leave the city to find food. "Go now," they would whisper to each other when the soldiers had turned their backs. Occasionally, somebody would slip and fall or move too slowly and get caught. Punishment would be meted out and was entirely dependent upon the mood of the soldier, but the beatings were usually severe enough to dissuade a repeat of the offense. Just a few weeks before, Inge had been roaming around the train tracks weighing her options for escape. She stumbled upon an overturned train car with half-frozen, rotting potatoes spilling out of it and could hardly believe her good luck. The last time she had potatoes was when she found some discarded peelings in the trash that littered the sidewalks and fried them in car oil for herself and her siblings. They tasted like harsh chemicals, but the children had gobbled it down. She was so captivated by the sight of this treasure trove that she forgot for a moment that she needed to be careful. Inge crouched down and placed the bucket that she had been carrying to collect food in on the ground and began to load it with potatoes. Suddenly, she felt the sharp heel of a boot to her back and went tumbling face first into the pile. As she turned to look up, she saw the angry red face of a Russian soldier dressed in warm winter attire with a gun slung over his shoulder. "Get out of here, you little Hitlerite," he spat at her. Inge scrambled to her feet and ran off, leaving her bucket behind. Lying on the floor of the train car, Inge could still feel the pulsing pain of the welt on her lower back. Then she heard the crunch of gravel as footsteps approached. She caught her breath and instinctively squeezed her eyes shut, as if her inability to see would somehow improve her hidden state. The Russians stopped next to their car and grunted a question. After many years of living under Soviet occupation, the women understood what was being asked of them. "Kaunas," one of them replied, confirming their destination. The soldier didn't notice the small lump that lay between them. Suddenly, she heard a familiar cry, "Inge!" It was Gerhard. She didn't realize her little brother had followed her. She had not confided in him about her plans. What is he thinking, calling out my name like that? Although he had become friendly with the Russian soldiers during the past year and a half of their occupation, being found loitering around the trains was an unforgivable sin, especially for boys. "Get out of here," Inge silently willed him away, every muscle of her body taut. "Go home and wait for Mama." Suddenly she heard the shrill sound of a whistle piercing the air. All around, people were shouting and scurrying. Boots made scuffing noises as a chase ensued. The soldier beside their car quickly ran to join them. Inge's breath caught in her throat. "They'll get Gerhard," she thought, stricken with fear. Her eyes began to sting from tears as she listened to the far-off sounds and tried hard to control her urge to leap out from beneath the blanket and rescue her brother. She knew she couldn't be of any help, and it would only end badly for her, but the burden of responsibility that came with being the eldest sibling was almost too much to bear. However, before she was able to decide what to do, she heard cries of disappointment. "They got away," one soldier yelled to the rest. Inge didn't know who they were, but she knew it meant Gerhard was safe. She let out a breath that she realized she had been holding in the whole time, and her body relaxed. "Don't do that again, you dumb boy," she thought to herself. As relief washed over Inge, she began to notice a familiar itch. Her family had been living in squalor, and over time, lice had infested her hair and burrowed into the open sores on her skin. They were terribly uncomfortable and nearly impossible to kill. She and Gerhard would spend hours picking the insects off of themselves and dropping them into a glass jar. The vermin were the size of sesame seeds and would writhe around endlessly before finally dying a day or two later. Another glass jar held urine they would use to wash and disinfect their skin in an attempt to rid themselves of the lice. The tingling sensation covered her whole body, but she knew she couldn't scratch. This opportunity was too important. It was a hurried encounter when the women welcomed her onto the train car, so they weren't aware of Inge's condition. She simply looked like a filthy, starving waif. If they had suspected that she was also infested with contagious parasites, they would have thought twice about their hospitality. So that gives you a picture of the condition that Inge was in when she snuck onto that train car. And then we'll show the film, and I'll take any questions that you have afterward, and then I would encourage you all to come forward and introduce yourself to Inge. She's absolutely lovely. In the spring of 1945, the Allies, led by the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union, defeated Germany, thus ending World War II. Countless books have been written about the unimaginable suffering and tragic deaths of tens of millions of people during the war. Many stories, however, remain untold. One such story is that of the orphaned East German children known as wolf children. When the Soviets conquered the German territory of East Prussia, German nationals began to evacuate. Later, they were forcibly expelled. Families were ripped apart and parents were separated from children. Many died. Wolf children is the name given to a certain group of orphaned German children who were left entirely on their own to survive at the end of World War II. They were called wolf children because of their wolf-like wanderings as they scrounged for food and searched for shelter. The total number of wolf children can only be estimated. Some say there were upwards of 25,000 of them roaming the woods and swamps of East Prussia and Lithuania. This is the story of one of those children.
My name is Inge. I was born October 6, 1935. I was born in East Germany. The city is called Königsberg, and I lived there through the war.
Königsberg was the former capital city of East Prussia. It is now called Kaliningrad, Russia. Königsberg was located on the southeast corner of the Baltic Sea and was the easternmost large city in Germany. The city was heavily damaged during World War II. Few traces of the former Königsberg remain today.
Needless to say, at one time I remember that we were shifted out to the country, but then for some reason we ended up back in the city again.
Inge was the oldest child and grew up with a younger brother and sister. Her father was in the military and also did odd jobs.
I remember him fixing aluminum pots, fixing pairs of shoes, so I guess trying to make ends meet. But that's all I know, and he did go work doing something on a farm.
Inge led a happy life in Germany until World War II broke out.
I did go to school first. Second grade was a little bit interrupted. Not that I minded, I kind of liked not having to go to school, being a kid. But then the third year was no good. I never finished. I then even never began, really. It was just in and out, and the sirens and the bombs and everything else.
Her father became sick during the war and in 1943 was sent home to die. Destruction was everywhere and there was no medical care for those who were injured or ill.
So then he got sent home, but by then I heard him talking that there was no more doctors or hospital. Everything was already bombarded out. So he had to stay home and die at home. She did. My mother wouldn't let us go into the room he was laying in.
During this time, Inge's mother was forced to go to work to provide for the family. In the morning, she would leave each of the children with a small piece of bread to last until she returned. Leaving their younger sister at home, Inge and her brother would spend the day scavenging for food. Inge was only 9 years old.
So my brother and I, we were going looking for potato peels that somebody throw out, pick some bones, chew on those, stay by a bakery. I remember this bakery, they used to cut up little pieces and sometimes give it to us kids. There'd be a bunch of kids waiting for a piece of bread. When the Germans were still controlling, they gave us some food, but everything was rationed. You couldn't have a lot of stuff, but bread was still there, and they give you some kind of a stamp. So you use your stamps up, you're done.
In 1944, Königsberg was decimated by 2 British air raids that dropped bombs which destroyed buildings and wreaked havoc in people's lives.
It was bombing all the time. The tyrants would be hauling and bombings be falling, so there was no school, there was nobody there. Everybody hid in basements, the big buildings and stuff. And then some of the buildings crumbled in, and people in those basements had to die. I heard them saying that people ate each other. They were desperate for something to eat, so I guess they ate each other to stay alive for a little bit longer.
The horrors of war continued.
Nighttime would be getting up, the tyrants would ring or howl or whatever, and then we all have to go down the basement and shiver, as kids, being waking up. Running from one basement to another. I remember having wet blankets over, and one time I remember wearing a mask. The smoke, the air is like, you couldn't see the sun, was all polluted.
The Battle of Königsberg was one of the last battles in the war. It started in late January 1945 when the Soviets surrounded the city.
You never know when the bomb's gonna, but they mainly did, like bridges, factories, all the important things for a country to run. Hospitals, everything that would hurt a country, that's what they did. And when American started, to help out, that's when really all hell broke loose. Bad. There was non-stop. And then after that, the war was over.
On April 9th, 1945, after 4 days of violent warfare, Soviet forces captured the city. Food was scarce, and the German people of Königsberg were starving.
But then the Russians took over. They took over the country. We were desperate. One time, these people found a young horse on the side, so they all were fighting for a piece of the meat. And I didn't get any. I was too late. And so, guess what? All the people that ate it, they all died. It was contaminated.
Inge and others resorted to scavenging.
And if some Russian guy would be eating a herring, we're all waiting for the head and the bones to pick it up when he throws it away.
They begged for food.
I had a can a good-sized can, about like a coffee can size, and go from door to door to see if they have any leftovers. So sometimes they give you a little bit something, sometimes not.
And they stole.
One time on this market, you're walking around to see what you can steal. So these two guys are talking, and there was a couple pieces of butter. And they're talking to each other, and I walk by. And I walk by again. What am I gonna do? What if I just take that? I did. I took the piece of butter. I started to run. It was slippery and wet, wintertime. I fell over. The butter fell ahead of me. I looked back. Nobody saw me. I call that good luck. Then I went back and I stole a piece of bread too. Took a lot of risks to have a piece of bread.
By June of 1945, the Soviets began rounding up Germans and putting them in camps. They were forced to walk hundreds of miles with no food or water. Many did not survive. It is estimated that 15 million Germans were brutally driven from their homes.
Then the Russians would take a horde of people, horde of us, and they on horses, and we all had to walk. Anybody that didn't make it, they kicked them to the side and let them die. The Russians separated us. They took a lot of kids and put us like behind fence with somebody with guns around watching us.
Concentration camps were reused as detention facilities for ethnic Germans. Men were captured and used as forced labor. More than half died in captivity. Women and children were forced into other camps. Inge was entirely on her own and didn't understand what was going on.
Once they came, they gathered everybody. But then after a while, I don't know what they did with the grown-ups. It was only women, after the war. There was no men. So they gathered all of us, and some people didn't make it. I don't remember giving any food. And I don't know where we ended up. My mother wasn't there. I don't know how. I don't even know how it happened. So the grown-up maybe get separated from the kids. And so we were kept in captivity. When the guys there that were supposed to be watching us, maybe they deliberately let us go, who knows. We escaped and we ran away, some of us, but everybody on their own,
Inge had heard there was food and relative safety in Lithuania. She and another child escaped from the camp and were able to sneak onto a train with the help of 2 Lithuanian women who themselves were very poor, but had traveled to Germany to bring food to those in need.
So those 2 ladies put blanket on top of us so we get to go. We didn't know where we're going. Somewhere where there's bread. And then we ended up in Kaunas. So there I was alone, like a lot of kids alone, and I wasn't the only one.
Separated from her mother, brother, and sister, tired, hungry, and still just a child, Inge made the brave decision to return to Germany in search of her family.
At some point I went back looking to find my mother. I went there where I left where we lived, and I looked there and I found some people that I recognized, I knew, and they didn't know. So I said, you know what? There's no food here. I'm going back on the train again.
Getting out of Germany was not easy. The trains were heavily guarded, and any German found getting on them was captured.
I know they're going to catch us and put us back again. So when the train stops, us kids go around and, hiding from the people that are going to come around and check. And when the train starts going again, I be jumping on it again. I don't know where I'm going again. Stupid, huh? It doesn't make much sense. As a 9 or 10-year-old, you don't know better.
Wolf children who reached Lithuania by train were called footboard travelers because they would jump on the steps of a rail car as the train was departing and ride on the outside.
So I ended up getting on this train on the steps outside. The train stopped a couple times, so another time by the next stop I almost fell off, I fell asleep. It was nighttime. So anyway, I don't know how I knew to get off there. Maybe I talked with someone else on the train, and I ended up in Lithuania again, which made me happy.
Life in Lithuania was not easy. Inge was forced to go from place to place and take on work in exchange for food and shelter.
So then I started wandering off. Just go and ask for something to eat. Sometimes people feel sorry, they want to keep you, give you overnight. Sometimes they want you to, help a little. I was young and I was small, I was told. So digging potatoes and help them pick up potatoes, do little things like that.
She learned to survive.
Then I'll go again, look and see, okay. Maybe I'll go in the afternoon, I start asking if I could sleep overnight. And they give you a sack of hay and then you sleep on that, give you a meal to eat. So then I did that all summer. You learn to save yourself. Maybe I dig a potato out, make a little fire, and I learned to cut the potato in half, scrape it inside out, and I put it back in and then bake it. But then they caught on to it, so I'm not supposed to take the potato. So then I had to stop.
For almost 15 years, Inge relied on the kindness of strangers.
I stayed in many places. I can't even remember all of them.
Those who helped the German children survive had to hide their efforts from the Soviet authorities in Lithuania.
Anything that you tell them about that you're against their communism or against Russian, or you even couldn't even sing a song that has words that they didn't go for. So everything was strict, forbidden. So I stayed there 4 years, but it was hard.
Soviet rulers did not allow for the adoption of German children. Lithuanians risked severe treatment by authorities if they were found to be sheltering wolf children. Out of fear of being deported to Siberia, often those who took in German children prohibited them from speaking German, and many German children's names were changed.
They changed my name is Inga. They changed my name in Lithuania to Janina. They didn't like my name.
It's clear that much like not understanding the absence of men in the concentration camps, Inge is still unaware of the grave reasons her name was changed. She is, however, acutely aware of how fortunate she is to have survived.
It's a miracle I'm alive. It is just a plain old miracle. When I think about it, my God.
Inge lived in Lithuania between the ages of 9 and 24. During that time, she encountered much kindness and generosity. However, as a young woman on her own, she also had some terrible experiences, sometimes at the hands of men she trusted.
Being a girl was hard.
When Inge was 21, she met a woman whose sister had recently married a German and was moving to West Germany. After having been separated for years, Inge was suddenly presented with the opportunity to be reunited with her mother.
My sister's going to Germany, she says. She married a German, she's going to Germany, she's moving there. So she says, maybe you can find your mother, Maybe you can get in touch with my sister and see what they can help you with. So that's how it started.
Inge learned that efforts were being made by the German Red Cross to reunite wolf children in Lithuania with their family members in Germany. Unfortunately, this was only an option for those who were old enough to remember their names and where they had come from. Younger children who didn't know who they were usually stayed with Lithuanian families because it was forbidden for them to return to Germany.
At that time, the Russians and the Germans had some kind of agreement that if any family, many kids were younger, they don't know who they are. They probably stayed there. But if you knew your last name and you remember anything, which I did.
With the help of friends who could read and write, Inge filled out the requisite paperwork and traveled alone to submit her application. Shortly afterward, she received word from the Red Cross.
It didn't take that long. I got this letter and I said, now what? I don't know what it says. I forgot German.
Inge sought out the local priest to read what was in the letter.
So I'm running down like crazy. I remember the feet didn't even reach the ground. I was going so fast. Yeah, he says you have a mother and you have a brother and a sister.
Inge was overjoyed. She learned that her mother and sister were living in West Germany. Years earlier, they had paid someone to take them there safely. In the 5 years immediately following World War II, over 15 million refugees fled Soviet-occupied Eastern Europe to the West. The number of people who died during flight and expulsion is estimated at anywhere from 500,000 to 2 million.
There was a time, that you paid somebody and they take you to the woods overnight, and that's how they ended up slipping into West Germany.
Her brother was in the process of returning to Germany after also spending 15 years in Lithuania. During all that time, neither he nor Inge knew that the other one was there.
When I started, he was already back in Germany, this time in West Germany. Then I found out I had a brother, he lived in Lithuania too. We didn't know.
It took about a year for everything to be processed, but then in 1959, after 15 years of separation, Inge was reunited with her mother.
Oh my God, I cried for days. I was so happy. My mother and I was looking at each other and crying because I didn't understand the German anymore and she didn't know any Lithuanian.
She learned that her sister had gotten married and had a baby, and her brother was living in an apartment by himself. And now, once again, her life was changed dramatically. After wandering for years on her own, staying with many different families, doing odd jobs in return for room and board, Inge was again living with her family. However, she was forced to relearn her native language and find a paying job in order to survive.
So I didn't know, how the German system worked. Then I got a job in the chocolate factory. So I worked there, but I guess I told them that I'm gonna move to America. They let me go, but I didn't work again.
Inge and her brother traveled to Lithuania to visit with the family who had helped reunite her with her mother. While she was there, she learned of a Lithuanian man living in America who was looking for a Lithuanian wife. Due to her limited prospects, Inge agreed to meet him.
I didn't have nothing. I didn't have no money. And there's no room, there's no chance of getting an apartment. One thing led to another. I'm thinking, what the heck?
After knowing one another for only a few days, the new couple agreed to get married.
So they introduced us with, me. I was very shy, always very shy.
6 months later, Inge arrived in the United States and joined her husband.
Well, I come over here. We don't know each other, really. He rented an apartment on the 3rd floor, and all these blinds there. Jesus, I feel like I'm in jail, and I'm crying.
Amazingly, Inge and her husband were married for close to 50 years.
Took a little time, but he was a nice guy and hardworking. Almost made 50 years married. Lasted a lifetime. I think it's determination. You don't get married to get divorced.
Now in the United States, and with only a second-grade education, Inge once again had to learn a new language.
And I came over here, again, a new language. I didn't know a word. Nothing. Nobody. I've been replanted many times.
Inge watched television and credited Sesame Street with teaching her English. She and her husband lived a modest life with their 3 children, but her experiences stayed with her.
I think it affected me a lot. I'm a good person. I hurt when I see somebody hurt. When I see something bad happen, I feel. I think it has a lot to do with the life that you've been living or through.
Not all wolf children have stories with happy endings. Of the estimated 25,000 wolf children, about 5,000 reached Lithuania and only a few hundred survived. None of these events were reported in the press because the official Communist Party line in Russia was that there were no Germans in those areas. They only became known to the public after 1990, when Lithuania regained independence from the Soviet Union and the wolf children were discovered. Almost 100 still live there today. Since the early 1990s, wolf children have fought for German citizenship. They have their own association and are still hopeful that they will one day be able to learn the fate of their relatives, obtain German citizenship, and reunite with their families. In recent years, the Lithuanian government has granted compensation to those who suffered as a result of World War II, so wolf children are eligible to receive a small pension. However, in German laws, the wolf children are not mentioned. Since 1992, a memorial has stood in Lithuania commemorating the thousands of East Prussian boys and girls who lost their parents at the end of the war.
I'm just a lucky person, that's all. It wasn't meant to be yet. My time wasn't there yet. People play the lotteries. I would not be happy to have that kind of winning, so I don't play that. I don't play lucky for life. That's more, you know.
So this video was made about 10 years ago, and after I made it, Inge and her daughter Bettina asked if I would write a book about Inge's experience. It took me about 5 years to research it. It's very difficult to find any information on that part of the world during that time period because of the war, because of all the destruction. There are no records left. So it was challenging to do that research. But as I watched this film, I noticed that there are a couple of, because it was done so early on in my understanding of Inge's story, a couple of discrepancies that I just want to clear up. Inge's mother didn't go to work while they were under German occupation. It was when they were under Russian occupation. So just in case you caught that and were kind of confused by that. And Inge wasn't put in a camp in Germany, in Königsberg. She was caught in Lithuania and put in a camp with other children, and she escaped from that camp in Lithuania. And that was a camp that was Lithuania was under Russian control at that point, so it was the Russian soldiers or the Lithuanian soldiers that were, doing the bidding of the Russians. She and her family did, however, get marched out of the city, out of Königsberg. This was obviously before she went to Lithuania. And they ended up staying in some sort of facility. And I'm not entirely sure what the purpose of that was, because again, it's so challenging to find any information. But then they were released and allowed to return to the city. And at that point, Inge and her mother and her younger brother and sister went back to the apartment that they had been living in. Miraculously, her apartment building is still standing to this day. Much of the city was destroyed, but she lived on the outskirts and that building is still standing. So they returned to the apartment, and a Russian family had already moved in. So as the Russian soldiers were coming in and destroying things, Russian civilians were coming in, and they were taking over land, taking over property, taking over structures that were still standing. So it happened very quickly. So for the rest of the time that she was in Königsberg, excuse me, they lived in bombed out buildings. Any buildings that the Russian people did not want to take over is where the German people ended up living. Those are a couple of little discrepancies that I wanted to mention. The other thing is this was done 10 years ago. I don't know how many German wolf children are still alive in Lithuania, but as Inge mentioned in the film, only the children who could remember their names and remember where they had come from could be potentially reunited with their families through the German Red Cross. She was obviously old enough at the age of 9, 10 years old when all of this happened to remember that information, but there were children who would either somehow end up in Lithuania at a very young age, either on their own, which was highly unlikely, or with a mother or an older sibling who then would die. So those children are the ones that ended up getting adopted by Lithuanian families and do not know who their families are. Kind of curious to know if anyone has done any research now that you can do your DNA. I don't know if any research has been done to connect these people, but I also don't know how many of them are still alive, quite frankly. So, does anybody have any questions after watching the film and hearing part of this presentation? The term wolf child, in case you didn't catch it, is a term that was given to these children because of their solitary wanderings as they scrounged for food and searched for shelter. So they were called wolf children because they behaved like wolves.
And they were in a pack.
They weren't in a pack. No, kids were by themselves. There were some, I've read other accounts of kids who were, with an adult or with other children. I don't know if that technically constitutes being a wolf child, because a wolf child is someone separated from their parents. But most of them were solitary. When I did the presentation at Hingham High School, one of the students asked if the wolf children kept in touch with each other, which just goes to show the generational difference. There was no social media back then. There was no email. Nobody had addresses. Nobody had a sense of permanence. But they also didn't know of the other children. So when she was in the countryside in Lithuania, she's not aware. I've asked her, did you notice any other wolf children that were wandering around looking for food and shelter like you were? And she said no. She has no memory of encountering anyone. And I just find it so remarkable that her brother was there too. So he ended up on a train just like she did, somehow ended up in a part of Lithuania that was a little more northern than where Inge was. And he was there for almost 15 years also. And neither one knew that the other one was there. It is terrible. My heart breaks for her mother. She says that when she was reunited with her mother said, "Sorry, I wish I could have raised you. I wish I could have held you as a child. I wish I could have known you during that time." So I have children, I'm sure many of you do as well. Can't imagine losing them to something like that. But she's remarkably gracious and grounded and kind in spite of everything that she's been through. She's got 3 wonderful children. She's got grandchildren, great-grandchildren. She's one of the loveliest people I've ever met. Yes?
I know that in the film, Inge, you mentioned that you bore the scars of your time as a wolf child. Was it like, did you hoard food once you were in America? Did you, like, my mother-in-law went through the Korean occupation, and she, for a while when she came to this country, she would, like, hoard food in her room in case of emergency for the kids. So I was just curious, what were some of the scars she bore and for how long?
Well, I can attest to the fact that she loves bread. Inge, I don't know if you heard the question, but when you first came back to Germany or when you moved to the U.S., did you hoard food? Did you save food for security reasons? And yes, she's nodding her head yes.
Just make sure for the next day there's food there.
Make sure that there's food for the next day. Always worried about the next day.
That's what Americans did in World War II.
Right.
Not like that, but they did hoard.
Yes. Yes.
I lived with my parents, my mother was in line, and many of these people would remember that.
Mm-hmm.
And they were very conservative. I mean, they kept penny pitched when they raised me because going through the Depression.
Right. Yes, exactly. Very similar to the Depression.
Sorry.
Yes.
I was just, it's remarkable, Inge's resourcefulness. And as I'm thinking, as was mentioned about the scars she bears from what she went through, I was thinking how we as affluent Americans, however affluent and whatever point of, affluency we're at, felt really put upon, very much so, by the pandemic. And when you look and see what someone like Inge and so many people during those times went through, hoarding toilet paper is not quite the same car as hoarding food for the next day.
Yes, that's a very good point. One of the things that, from knowing Inge, gives me perspective on my own life is if I complain about an inconvenience, I think I have my kids and my grandkids and my house, and I don't have to worry. I have food in my refrigerator.
And what would Inge do?
Exactly, yes. And I think of what she went through and how she kept her spirits up, and she persisted, and she, did everything that she could to keep herself alive. And I just find it so remarkable.
Survival of the fittest.
Unfortunately, yes.
Darwin's theory.
Yes.
And maintained her humanity.
Yes. Yep, very much so. She does, she did tell me a couple of times, when she hears people say they're starving, oh, I'm hungry, I'm starving. She says, you have no idea what starvation feels like. No idea. And obviously it's a colloquialism. It's something that we just say. But, that gives her perspective. She's so grateful for everything that she has in her life. And that's a lesson for all of us.
Now, when she came to America, did she find the Americans welcoming and generous?
Did you find the Americans welcoming and generous?
Yeah.
Yes.
It's wonderful.
Well, that's one.
Well, the Americans were going to be the heroes in the story. She remembers hearing that the Americans were going to come, the Americans were going to save them, the Americans were going to rescue everybody. Unfortunately, that didn't happen, but definitely, not for lack of trying, for sure. But yes.
I'm amazed at the young age that she was able to travel to Lithuania, and then she at some point found her way back to Germany and found where she used to live. I keep thinking to myself, I would be lost. I wouldn't even know how to begin to find it at such a young age.
Yes.
I don't know how to do that now.
Thank goodness for GPS, right? I know, it is remarkable.
I'm convinced you get a sixth sense at times when you're desperate.
A sixth sense in times of desperation. I agree, you're sort of on heightened alert,
Yeah.
aware of your surroundings. And she did live in a city, so the train pulled into the city, and it was a matter of navigating through the city to get to her apartment. But I agree. I mean, I think of myself when I was 10 years old, and I don't know if I could have found my way, if you would drop me someplace, if I could have found my way home. Yes.
So I was with her right from the beginning.
Yes.
The little sister, was she always with the mother?
Inga's not entirely certain who took care of her little sister when she and her brother were out looking for food because her mother was working. They did live in these bombed out buildings, and there were other people in these bombed out buildings. So she thinks that maybe some of the other adults who weren't able-bodied to work were taking care of her sister. But her mother and her sister are the ones that ended up in Germany proper together.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Did she have faith?
Pardon me?
Faith?
She talks about how she would pray. Yes. Is that what you said, faith?
Yes.
Yes. Yep. All right, if there are no more questions, we have about 2 minutes left. I don't want to keep all of you. I'm sure you have other things to be going to today, and I want to give you time to come up and say hello to Inge if that's something that you'd like to do. Thank you so much. This was really wonderful. And thank you, Kathy. Really appreciate it.